I would like to now ask Partha Prabhu to step forward just to sort of make a statement about the purpose, hopes, and goal of the panel for tonight. If you would, sir.
Thank you. So our purpose ultimately is to fulfill the purposes of Srila Prabhupada. And if you're familiar with Srila Prabhupada's statement of purpose that he drafted when he formed our society, in two of the items, the third one and the sixth item, he mentioned bringing the members closer together. And Srila Prabhupada wasn't just talking about geographically. He wanted us to come together to become nearer to Krishna. And so he mentioned that twice. So that's a very important part of Srila Prabhupada's mission, was for us to come together in a meaningful way, to develop meaningful connections. And so that's going to be the essence of what we're trying to do this afternoon and share with you, is the importance of developing meaningful connections. Look at some ways we can cultivate those meaningful connections. Look at some things that can help us prevent disconnects and also to repair those times when we do become disconnected. So that is what our hope is, that from what we do tonight, it'll give you some understanding of how to better develop meaningful connections, to maintain them. And so our ultimate hope is that all of you will take something away tonight that will help you to deepen your relationships, not just for yourselves, but also for Srila Prabhupada and for Lord Krishna, because ultimately that was Srila Prabhupada's purpose, to bring us together and near to Krishna. So that's Srila Prabhupada's desire. And so I hope we can all see that is also a responsibility that we can try and fulfill by understanding these topics this afternoon. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Partha Prabhu. Appreciate it. So let's dive in. I know that there have been some new people just coming in a little bit late, so that's fine. We welcome you. And just to let you know, we're going to, Akanta Bhakti and I will ask the panel some questions ourselves in the first half of the program. In the second half of the program, we invite the audience to ask us questions. And for the new people, the way you do that is you can either, if you're on Zoom, you can type in your questions directly in the chat box, directly to Akanta Bhakti and myself. Or you can, for everybody else, and even if you're on Zoom, you can click the link that Ladini has provided in the chat box, the link which takes you to an anonymous Google questionnaire. So then we will receive your questions anonymously through that form. Okay, so those are the ways you can ask your questions, and we hope you do have questions for our panel. Okay.
All right, so without further ado, this question is directed to Braj Leela and Ekavira Prabhus. So this first question is, modern technology can be a tremendous threat to modern families. What spiritual technology or technologies can families apply to maintain and increase connections with family members?
Thank you, Ekanta Bhakti. So, Ekavira, spiritual technologies. I don't think that's something that many people kind of talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see if we can talk about it.
Well, yeah, spiritual technologies. It's always been there. Spiritual technologies, they come from ancient spiritual wisdom. And so we want to share a little bit tonight. Hopefully, Ekavira and I can, give you something to go away with.
Very simple.
That's very simple. That's very ancient. And I just wanted to share a little bit about spiritual technologies in relationship to the question, which is related to modern technology and how it impacts modern families. So when we think of modern technology, oftentimes it's usually an uneasy relationship with spirituality, usually. Usually most people think that technology and spirituality are like opposed to each other. And some people, they even think that technology is kind of less than being spiritual. Like somebody that's into technology isn't normally seen as a spiritual person in many, many cases. Or because they do think that technology is anti-spiritual. Many people think this. And so some people, they even think that technology is evil or dehumanizing. However, what we want to bring to your attention tonight, or to your awareness, is that technology and spirituality actually belong together, that they help to make each other, they can make each other stronger. And so spiritual technology has always been a part of the practice of persons that are wanting to stay connected together. This has always been the case. And so when we think about modern technology and the impact it has on modern families, we want to look at, well, what is it that creates, this evil kind of mentality? And that's because modern technology, without a foundation of understanding spiritual technology, will ultimately create chaos in our communities. And it ultimately creates chaos in our families, especially in our modern families. And statistics is showing us that there are threats to our modern families, especially when it comes to the computer, for example. There's so many different aspects of how the computer can affect our lives, affect the lives of our children. So some of the ways that our children are affected is that they have anxiety, they have depression. Some of them suffer from substance abuse. Many are addicted. Some are having mental illnesses, psychosis. Some of the parents have psychosis. There's cultural challenges between a child and a parent when when they come from different countries. For example, somebody coming from one country to the U.S., a parent raising a child from another country, they usually experience some difficulties because modern technology doesn't always give us the tools of how to deal with, a child that's coming into a new country. And so we really the modern families are really affected by this in many, many ways. And we see even with adults, for example, we see that there is an increase in spousal abuse because of technology in many ways. There is infidelity, there's divorce, there's pornography, there's, lack of communication skills. All of these things have increased to the degree that modern technology have increased. And they all affect our modern families, whether the modern families are devotees, aspiring devotees or not. We see that we can't just say this is only in the secular environments. No, it is also in the devotee environments. And so we need to give some attention to how to give support to our families. And so Ekavira Prabhu, he's going to share with us some of these ancient cultural wisdom that we've put aside because of thinking that modern technology will create this wonderful, beautiful environment for us to live. And it's not always a fact. This is not always a fact. So we want to get the spiritual foundation so that we can use technology in ways that can benefit our modern families. So Ekavira Prabhu.
Thank you, Rajalila. And as Rajalila expressed, we share something, and very, very simple. It's not anything that we haven't heard before, because in our modern families, it's important to make a deep connection. And in our books, in our process of Vaishnava Siddhanta, we are given instructions on how we can make that deep connection, and primarily through the 6 loving exchanges. And we'll speak about the 2 exchanges, revealing one's mind and confidence, and inquiring confidentially. And this is something that Brajalila and I, we actually work with people throughout the world, is inside of ISKCON society as well as outside of the society. And unfortunately, this particular exchange is a challenge even among spouses. And so we would like to encourage devotees to take this particular technology, spiritual technology, and utilize this with great depth and appreciation with our spouses. Another aspect that we can actually engage in and revealing our mind in confidence is outside of our household, and that's to develop a spiritual buddy system. Find someone, at least one person. Again, this is something that we find that there are some persons that don't have anyone that they feel safe in which they can open up and reveal their mind in confidence. And this is an unfortunate situation. And as I said, the spiritual buddy system is something that I value, and one of my spiritual buddies is here on the call in the conference, Jagannath Pandit Prabhu. And he's been that for me for 30 years, and we appreciate that so much. And so this is an exchange that also takes place with our children. As our children grow, especially when they develop their identities in their teen years, Srila Prabhupada expresses that this is the time in where we develop our friendships with our youth, our children. And this loving exchange can be applied with our children and can be applied with great depth, as I expressed. When we actually interact with our children in the mood of curiosity, a compassionate hearer, trying to listen to the needs of our children, and then that listening, and then basically showering them with affection and appreciation and validation. Because if our children don't get the affection and appreciation and validation in our home community, our families, then they'll go outside of the family. And most of the time it's through the internet, through different technology that they try to develop and try to get this need for appreciation and validation met. And unfortunately is not in healthy ways. So those are two points, one point, but how we can actually engage in the loving exchange of revealing our mind and confidence. Again, this is something that's very simple, but at the same time, it's amazing. One thing I did want to share also in our service as a pastoral counselor, if you will, appreciating this more and more and more. Not only as giving recommendations to persons that we work with, but also walking it, actually engaging in the process with, as I said earlier, with my counselor, Rajalila. So thank you again.
Sorry if we went over time.
Just a minute, we've got to finish up here.
Yeah, hang on just a moment.
Okay. I'm sorry, I missed some of that. Could you repeat it?
Where do you want us to start?
That was great. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much. So yeah, there's modern technology and there's spiritual technologies, right?
Yes.
So a little follow-up to you both. What spiritual technologies do we personally apply to keep us connected through our difficult growing periods? We all kind of go through periods where it's a little tougher than other times. So what spiritual technologies can we use to help us through those times?
And Brajalila, Ekavira told us about his counselors. What about you? Who do you go to?
Well, we got to talk about that now, who I go to. Yes.
Yes. Thank you for that question. In our relationship, it's interesting because we do have spiritual technologies and we do take shelter of those spiritual technologies, but we're going to be honest with you. it's not always the time in which we have these difficulties that we go directly to our spiritual technology. However, through our relationship and our application of the technologies, the times that we have challenges, the lesson, the times we are away from each other and not connected, they decrease. So our cycle is something like this. When we have a particular challenge, the first thing that usually takes place is that we both shut down.
Yeah. No, I'm out of here. I'm in another room.
Oh, and then I go into my cave. And so, but this is a step in which I call it taking a break or breathe, because in many of our relationships, we tend to react immediately, and we say things that we later regret or do things that we later regret, like we talked about the violence in relationships. So we actually go through a period of shock, and we shut down, and then we go to our spaces, just like, in a like in a boxing match, go to your corner. So we go to our corners, and then at that point in time, we take shelter of our spiritual technology or technologies. They are different, and everyone has to find out what aspect of devotional service, there are 9 processes of devotional service, that we mostly resonate with. And so I personally tend to take shelter of chanting, and then finding my spiritual buddy, finding someone to reveal my mind and confidence. And Brajalila, she takes shelter of hearing and reading and her communication workshop and information in that regard. And then after we take shelter of the spiritual technology, we come back together and we can communicate with depth and in the mood of being our brother and sister's keeper, in the mood of being a servant, and in the mood of actually looking out for each other.
So yeah, as Kavira says, this Rupa Goswami, he's given us so many technologies actually, and giving gifts and charity. And so the gift that we share with each other, especially during this pandemic, we have seen that our presence with each other is a gift. We utilize our presence because we can't go anywhere. So we're around each other all the time. So we find ways that we can see each other as gifts that's given by Krishna for both of us. So I see Ekavir as a gift. He sees me as a gift. Of course, like I said, there are times when we have breakdowns with that, and he's not a gift. He's like, However, we, as we shared though, if we have this foundational understanding of spiritual technology, we will be able to move through those habits that we have had for probably, many lifetimes or whatever, so that we can kind of get quickly to connecting with each other. And so some of the other technologies that I use, like Kavira mentioned about hearing, and of course taking shelter of some of the tools that I have, which is conflict resolution tools, self-awareness tools, communication tools, emotional intelligence tools. These are all tools that I recommend that everyone, every couple needs to have some understanding about this, so that when we do have some challenge, that we can immediately go to our spiritual technologies and see how they connect with with these other tools that we may learn in our secular society. So for me, Ekavir and I, we give Srimad Bhagavatam classes together. We study together. We talk about spiritual realizations together. One of the technologies that I use, a spiritual technology that works for me, is I immediately, when there's this, distance, when we take this time out, as we call it, I immediately go to prayers. I have a book of prayers from the great saints that have written prayers. And I sit with those prayers and I read them. And oftentimes if I read those prayers, for, just 15 minutes, it gets me out of that space. And it gets me into a space where I can, be open to communicating with some of the other tools that somehow are in my tool bank. Another one of Rupa Goswami's principle is Prashanam. So that's something we enjoy honoring together for sure. And also, of course, cooking and offering that Prashanam to the deities. And so these tools we find are critical, critical. Because at the end of the day, I can have so much emotional intelligence. I can know so much conflict resolution skills. I can know so many things. However, if I don't have a connection with a tool that's connecting me to something beyond this world, then I can stay in that space of just being, with my emotions, angry or disappointed or sad or whatever it might be. And so these are some of the tools that we use. We use them. We've been using them for years. And actually, as we go on in our marriage, as the years go on, we find that we are increasing in our spiritual technologies. We are increasing in utilizing our spiritual technologies. We're becoming even more aware of more spiritual technologies. So we're grateful. We're very grateful for that.
One thing I would like to add, if I could, and this is due to one of, her engaged in a loving exchange with another devotee. And that is we tend to recreate together, recreation. Mm-hmm. And that's something, having shared downtime. And that's something that we didn't do for many, many years. And we realized that, especially during this pandemic, that when we added that to our activities, that tended to lessen the difficulties or the challenges in our relationship.
And the spiritual technology is another one. Thanks, Ekavira, is to serve others. So that spiritual technology we utilize, and every day, every single day, we make it a point to serve someone else. So we're always mentoring others. We're always somehow or other, even individually and together, we always find a way to make ourselves available for another person, because that's a spiritual technology that when we utilize that spiritual technology, it helps us to move away from some of the things that may not be so important, but yet we may become, we may have emotions about those things. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I apologize for going over time.
Sorry.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You devotees are incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's so good to have these tools, like real things that we can hold on to. So important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next question is directed to Jagannath Pandit Prabhu. And our question is, how can I reconnect with my partner during times of difficulty or conflict?
That's a good question. First, we can recognize that that often what we see in our partners is someone that is in the process of becoming who they really are. And in that process, we intimately see each other's weaknesses and strengths. And some of those are kind of built into the fact that we are here in this material world, right? We have the 4 defects. We have imperfect senses. We have a tendency to be an illusion. We make countless mistakes, and we have a tendency to cheat. So with that, in our relationships, these kind of things are going to inevitably appear. False ego, we can get critical with each other. We can get defensive, we can argue, You may say mean things to each other. You know, sometimes, as Ekavir and Rajalila were mentioning, stonewalling or cutting off communication. I mean, these are patterns that are more or less in all relationships. But the key thing to remember, I think, is, as Srila Prabhupada described, is that we are all unripe mangoes. And it takes time for us to actually ripen. And we definitely will ripen. It just takes time and support. And sometimes that process is bitter, sometimes it's sweet, sometimes it's bittersweet, but it's all part of the ripening process. And we can support each other in that. And one of the keys that makes a huge difference in whether relationships grow or erode is making repair attempts. There's a amazing marriage researcher, very well known, John Gottman, and he's done research for looking at over 3,000 couples, married couples, and so many things he's discovered. But one of the things he's discovered is that what makes or breaks a relationship is how people make repair attempts. So what is a repair attempt? A repair attempt is any statement or action, verbal, physical, or otherwise, meant to diffuse negativity and keep a conflict from escalating out of control. And he describes that any statement or action, silly or otherwise, that prevents negativity from escalating out of control. And so, and it's usually when you think of repair, you're thinking of, oh, something's broken, so I got to fix it. But in this sense, it's a little different. It's not that we're trying to fix something that's broken. Okay, our partner's not broken. You know, we're not broken. Our relationship is not broken. But what happens in a conflict is that there's a disconnect that happens. And so with repairing a relationship, I mean, when we're repairing, making a repairing attempt, we're attempting to reestablish that connection. So in one sense, you could say that we're repairing the connection in our relationship. And we're a couple and we're partners, so we're a pair. So if there's a disconnect, we want to repair or come back together in our connection with each other. Because that's how much that person means to us. You know, we recognize that the relationship is much more important than some transitory conflict or a problem. And we want to hurry up and get beyond that disconnect and reconnect. And we want to live in that connection with each other. So he describes that the repair attempts, they can be little simple little things that shift the dynamic or shift the conversation and ultimately shift our connection, ultimately reestablish our connection with each other. So some examples are, it can be something you say or do. So what I noticed with my wife, and this is, I don't know if this is typical for most men and women, but my wife actually, she does this naturally, so easily. It's just like it's a really natural thing for her. That if there's some disconnect between us, she takes the initiative. For me, I'm more of an internal person, and I take more time to process things. And so she reaches out often to me, which is something I appreciate, because sometimes I need to be drawn out, to connect. So some of the things that John Gottman gives is that we can make statements that bring about reconnection. So how can we make this work for us, whatever the conflict is? This is important to me. Can you please listen? Or I'm listening. This is important to you. How about let's agree to disagree in this situation? And the thing is, you notice that with John Gottman, one of the things he says in relationships is that 70% of issues that people have in their relationships will never, ever be resolved. So when repair attempts is not to resolve an issue, it's reestablishing connection. So whatever it takes to move beyond a tiff or a conflict or situation, we can do that to establish our reconnection. So there's little things that my wife does, little silly things, that she may say or do that I'm not going to share, but it definitely just like diffuses, our situation. It could be a pet name that you call each other, or a facial expression that says, yeah, I know I messed up here, or it could just be, I'm so sorry, Prashanam. It could be something like, I feel hurt, I'm here for you. We're getting off track in this conversation. How can this work for us? Things like that. So one of the other things which I'll let my wife establish more, as I pass it on to her, is the key role of friendship in connection as a foundation for the relationship.
So yeah, these repair attempts are very, very important. And one of Jagannath Pandit's nickname is Jagannath Pandit because he loves words and he loves puns. So I really love how he took this word repair attempts and said repair, because you want to come together again as a pair, making the connection paramount. And so one of the questions that can come up is, when I try repair attempts, sometimes it makes things worse. So you guys are saying that repair attempts are wonderful, but lots of times when I try repair attempts, it makes things worse. So there's a few reasons, many reasons, why repair attempts may not be successful. And one reason is, as Jagannath Pandit just mentioned, that repair attempts are built for their optimum functioning on a strong foundation. So having a friendship or treating your spouse as a friend establishes a strong foundation. So if in your daily interactions, you're intentional about saying things you appreciate about your spouse, noticing positive things they do for yourself or the household or the devotees or the community, encouraging your spouse, helping your spouse with things. So the more that you're interacting with your spouse in a way that's building and creating a strong foundation, your marriage and your unit will be much more fortified, such that when you have difficulties, you'll be more equipped and more likely to think about a repair attempt, and your spouse will be more receptive to receive it. If your ongoing daily exchanges with your spouse are arguing and anger and blocking off communication in a harsh way, or not speaking for days and things like that, which may come up for all of us, but if we're not monitoring that and those things become the norm, then repair attempts are unlikely to be successful. So we want to think about ways we can increase relating with our spouse as a friend. The other reason that repair attempts may not be successful is that we may not be in a space, emotionally or mentally, to be able to make those attempts. So earlier, Mother Bajula and Ekavira talked about a very important strategy, which is taking time to calm and ground yourself. That's really, really important. And a lot of what makes relationships work is being really committed to your self-awareness, your self-growth, your self-development. And as devotees or spiritualists, that's always centered in Krishna consciousness. So as we're more aware of ourselves and what our triggers are and what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are, we can be better able to notice, hey, this is a time where I probably need to take some space. I may just need to go quietly by myself. I may take some deep breaths to kind of balance that physiological arousal. So oftentimes, or always, when we're in conflicts or we're heated, cortisol increases in our body, adrenaline increases in our body. There's a whole physiological response called fight or flight, which we've all heard of most likely, and that it's a survival mechanism, so that, you know, in a situation where there's a lion, a tiger, or a bear, or your life's at risk, then your body needs to get aroused. The blood needs to go from your head, your thinking center, to your limbs because you need to run. Your digestion slows down, your pupils dilate. So all these things get you ready to defend yourself, to save yourself from being eaten by a tiger. In this very fast-paced world, earlier, it was spoken about modern society. Modern society puts us in a very highly stressed and rushed state. So our bodies are constantly going to hyperarousal. So number one, that creates kind of a baseline of like high arousal, which may make us higher to be over responsive. And in the times we are over responsive, just the physiology of the fight or flight response, you don't have blood going adequately to your brain. Your thinking centers are not working adequately. So you're not really in a position to calmly and properly, oftentimes, work with your mate. So again, going somewhere quiet, breathing, chanting, doing whatever practices work for you, all your different tools that might be in your toolbox are important. And having a foundation of self-care. Sometimes we get in conflicts with our spouses because we're tired, because we haven't eaten, because we're stressed with our kids or our job. So doing things for our own personal self-care also helps our relationship. And a few more things I'll just say quickly. Love languages. So the 5 love languages, that's a book that, you know, we can read. There's different love languages. There's 5 that were the basis of this, you know, book that's been out for many years. Words of affirmation, receiving gifts, physical touch, acts of service, or quality time. So all of us value these things to some degree or another, but we tend to have one that we value the most. And we may be attempting to make a repair with our mate in a way that doesn't work for them. So someone whose love language isn't touch, and we're trying to minimize conflict or recover after conflict and we touch the person, that's not going to be an optimal thing that'll feel like a repair. Maybe that person's love languages is word of affirmation. So it may work better for that person if you just say something like, oh, I, see that maybe I wasn't listening enough to what you said. I'm sorry. So it's important to know what works for our partner. And lastly, Jagannath Pandit spoke about this statistic from Dr. Gottman that says, from his many years of research and observation of thousands of couples, that 70% of problems are not resolvable. So for some people, that can be bad news. Like, wait a minute, 70% of our problems are not resolvable. What's the use? But it can also be good news because it can let you know we're all in the same boat. A lot of our struggles are normal. And those unresolvable issues, he's referring to issues that are a function of our basic personality differences. Try as we might to change our mate's personality, all of us are seeing it does not work, unfortunately. So that's an area that's kind of not going to change. Not to say we can't improve, but our basic natures and our personality traits are kind of pretty stable. And the other area is firm kind of lifestyle perspective. There's certain things that are pretty stable by the time people get married. So that's not bad news. What it is that the more we can use these repair attempts, to use communication, to use the strategies that we've all been speaking about now, it can teach us how to tolerate. Tolerance is an important quality, as we know from our scriptures. So the goal is to be able to tolerate the things that aren't so resolvable, to be able to work on the situational aspects that are resolvable, and to be able to move past the conflicts as quickly as possible to go back from connection. And this is built back to connection. And this is built on a foundation, on a spiritual foundation with Krishna as the center, and using the many tools that we know and can research and learn about so that we can move past challenges and to come back to connection so we can ultimately do the work of why we're together, growing spiritually, assisting others spiritually, and serving our spiritual master, and ultimately not having to be in samsara dealing with repair attempts. We can be with Krishna in the spiritual world and be serving. Jai.
Ultimate repair.
Yeah, the ultimate repair. Back to Godhead. Hare Krishna.
Oops. There it is. There we are now. We're there now. Okay, you can hear me? Oh, okay. We're getting weird signals from the thing, from the screen. Thank you. That was an incredibly thorough dissertation on that question. So we really appreciate that from both of you. No, it's a good thing, man. It's a good thing. Absolutely. You mentioned keeping Krishna in the center, which is something that we all talk about. I would like to go to Partha Prabhu right now and ask you about that, Prabhu, a little bit. There's connecting. There's connecting with Krishna, and there's my marriage, right? What exactly does my marriage have to do with connecting to Krishna?
It's very important because your behavior is the manifestation of your Krishna consciousness. And your behavior with other people is a very direct manifestation of Krishna consciousness. If I'm praying to my deities in my house, my dear Lord, I want to develop pure love for you, but I hate my wife, is Krishna going to be pleased with that? Probably not. Probably not. And Prabhupada gave this nice explanation once of love. And he was saying, why does everyone care for their body? He said, no one cares for the dead soul, for a dead body, but we all take care of our body, our health, we eat properly, exercise. And Prabhupada said, that's because of the presence of the soul. And then he said, why do we care for the soul? He said, we care for the soul because the soul is connected with Krishna. And then he said, in the same way, why do we care for others, our spouses, our family members, our community members, the greater world? Why do we care for these people? And again, Srila Prabhupada said, because of the presence of the soul. And then he said, in this way, that love goes to Krishna. So we understand that Krishna says one who says he's my devotee, he's not really my devotee, but one who's a devotee of my devotee, of my devotee, of my devotee, he's actually my devotee. So our love for Krishna is manifest in how we respect, treat, and have compassion for those around us. That's extremely important. And it was interesting in that conversation, Srila Prabhupada, he said, but the disconnect, he said the interruption in that connection is illusion. So Prabhupada's acknowledging sometimes in these personal relationships, we're trying to have this state of harmony, but there are these disconnects. Just like Ekavira and Rajalila were talking about how they defined it as spiritual technology can be used to help maintain that state of connection. And Jagannath Pandit and Chintamani are describing these repair attempts. And those repair attempts and that technology helps us to eradicate those illusions that actually separate us from each other and prevent that flow of affection to go to Krishna. So that's extremely important for us to see that our ashrams and our relationships with our family is a very important part of our Krishna consciousness. And it's something we can't separate. And so it's we can never drive home that point enough. Sometimes there's, I think we discussed this in a previous session, how there's these negative attitudes or paradigms that, well, family life is just a deep, dark well. It's nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, but that is very incorrect understanding of Vaishnava Siddhanta. So we really want to impress this point that your relationships are extremely important to your Krishna consciousness, that you develop these spiritual qualities by making these repair attempts. And there's one psychologist, he describes very nicely how in a relationship of marriage, there's different forces. There's a force of attraction that draws you together, that feeling of connection. And there's also a feeling of this disconnect. So those are two opposing forces. And he said there's a third force, and that third force is what the previous presenters have been talking about, and that's the force exerted to bring the disconnect back into connection. And the psychologist, he describes that third force, that repair attempt, that energy you put to reconnect, he says that's the force that drives love, that you're always looking to reconnect. And ultimately, in the highest platform, if we're always maintaining that connection, then even the seeming disconnects are almost inconsequential. Like Prabhupada described once how in a healthy marriage, he said, might be a little tiff between husband and wife, but it's like in India sometimes there's a huge boom of thunder and there's no rain. So there might be some little tiff and it's gone the next second. But on the material platform, it becomes like World War III because the disconnect is so great. So it's extremely important for couples to see that your marriage is a great responsibility, and there are tools and ways in which you can keep that relationship healthy.
Prabhu, even when there's a loud crack of thunder and no rain, that crack of thunder is still pretty scary. Yes, you admit? Thank you very much.
Okay, to extend this further, Partha Prabhu, how do we keep Krishna in the center? Right? We have so many Grihastha responsibilities. How do we make sure Krishna is really in the center of all of that?
So Krishna is in the center. We can understand that philosophically. He's within the atom. So he's in the center. He's in the middle. He's on the outside. He's above, he's below, he's on the left, on the right. Krishna is absolutely everywhere. Every atom is Krishna's energy. So where is Krishna not? And Srila Prabhupada said something interesting once. He said, the material manifestation is that aspect of the Lord's creation in which his all-pervasiveness is not perceived. So if we're not seeing Krishna is in the middle, in the center, on the outside, everywhere, we're in the material creation. But even we're here in this world, if we see we're surrounded by Krishna and he's actually arranging everything, he's arranging these situations where it appears like my wife is somehow provoking and irritating me.
See, it's Krishna Prabhu.
It's Krishna Prabhu.
It's not
Yeah,
me.
it's actually Krishna. Somehow Krishna is arranging this to help me develop spiritual qualities of patience and humility and tolerance. And if we could actually see that, it would become much easier. We tend to think in those times that my spouse is my enemy. Sometimes newlyweds, they go through a stage where they think, they start to discover their differences and they think, well, where did my spouse go? There's some alien here now that looks like them, who's my opponent. But that's actually a natural stage in marriage where you begin to discover your differences and you have to learn to navigate and honor and respect those differences. And we understand how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, if you want to chant the holy name of the Lord constantly, you have to become more tolerant than the tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige and ready to offer all respects to others. So we tend to forget that that also means our spouse. We need to be tolerant and patient and respectful. And marriage is an opportunity to practice those qualities. And because we could imagine, I want the most perfect place I'd like to live, maybe by the ocean somewhere where I could go surfing in the morning and there's a mountain there with snow. I could go skiing in the afternoon and there's beautiful fruits and I'm all by myself and there's no one to bother me. Would I make spiritual advancements or probably not? I'm not going to develop humility and patience and tolerance. I need a little,
Abrasion.
I need some little abrasion to help me develop those qualities.
I'm here for you, Prabhu.
And so those things aren't bad. And I want to qualify that by saying, I'm not meaning that we should accept abuse. That's a totally different topic. But it's normal in marriage. There are differences. There is friction. There are challenges. And it's 100% normal. And it's a part of the process of growth. And if we can see that as such, it can help us to not take it so seriously. So that's a very important point, to see that Krishna is actually behind that. And that may be difficult to see in the heat of the moment. We were just talking to a young couple today, and the young lady said she realized how when she tended to start a difficult topic, she was starting at 60 miles an hour. And I said, everything's probably a blur. And she said, yeah. So like Chintamani was talking about this escalated state. So it's difficult. But again, as they were saying earlier in the sessions, how with a little spiritual technology, we can calm down. We can de-escalate. We can start off at 5 miles an hour so we can kind of see what's going on. We can negotiate with respect. And doing that helps us to understand that, yes, this is what Krishna wants. I'm doing this because Krishna, I don't feel like it, but I know Krishna wants us to do that. So if we do that, it'll help us to realize Krishna. Say something?
I do.
So just at the same time, we worship Krishna in our house. And if we probably realize that, okay, Krishna's in my house, if I realize that, would I be disrespectful to my wife or say nasty things or be inconsiderate, if I actually realize that, no, I probably wouldn't be. So if I realize Krishna is actually in my house, I would be behaving like a pure devotee. I may not realize Krishna is actually in my house, but I could behave like it. Then one day I'll realize Krishna's in my house. So it's like a two-edged sword.
I was just going to add that, we also take a lot of strength from chanting together in the morning. It really connects us. We get up and we don't turn on many lights, so I don't see that I have to clean and this and that. We just try to stay focused. And we do our puja together. And in the evening, we've started, just taking some time where we just sit down together and, we read something together. And I really find that connecting, because when Krishna's there, you feel even more connected than when Krishna's not there. So, there is the obvious of doing, Krishna conscious things together, but you're really only going to feel connected if you have all the other attitudes also, because you can't just, fake it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So I'm glad to know that I'm actually serving my wife by giving her so many opportunities to be patient and tolerant. Good. That's good to know. So
It's kind of like exercise, right? Unless you increase the weights, you don't get stronger.
right. Okay. So Uttama, Prabhu, a lot of us have grown up on movies and TV shows where there's, they meet and they fall in love and they live happily ever after. And
Until the commercial.
at least until the commercial. But no, by the end, they're always like, it's a perfect relationship. So I'm asking you, Prabhu, please tell us, what is a perfect marriage?
Well, a perfect marriage is one where we deeply understand that Krishna's placed me here because there's some crucial lesson that I need to learn in order to go back home, back to Godhead. So that doesn't mean we should stay in highly abusive relationships, but we have to have faith that there's some tests we need to pass and something we need to learn, in order to progress. So, it's kind of a romantic question that you're asking me. It's like a Valentine's Day question. The Disney, live happily ever after. When we understand that it's really a myth, we actually get married and then we can begin the hard work, of living happily ever after. So I think we have to understand that nobody has a perfect relationship, and we need to be happy with a good enough relationship. I remember one lady, she wrote a book, Mr. Good Enough, because she could see that, her friends had these, husbands, and, she'd been looking for the perfect man, and she saw her friends were with people that it wasn't perfect,
They're happy.
but somehow or other overall they were happy. So, my husband makes the most perfect chutneys. He makes these great tomato chutneys that he grows from the garden, with love, but you should see the stove after he's done, and I get the answer. I don't do stoves. Okay, well, so, the chutney's great. And, I just realized that, okay, I get to take part and I get to do the stove, but there's the other perfect parts where, every time I bring home groceries, my husband's immediately out there, helping me carry them in. So, he's good enough, even if the stove's a mess, I'm happy. So we have to see that really what we need in relationships is we need friendship, we need kindness, we need mutual respect, and we need to care, about the other person and be there for them. And, that's perfect. And if Krishna's in our relationship, and we're somehow helping each other to progress towards Krishna, then it's perfect.
Well, thank you, I guess. I mean, that wasn't really the answer I was looking for, but but no, that's great. That's great because I think some of us are sort of conditioned in that way that that's the idea of soulmate where everything is perfect. Well, soulmate, maybe, maybe not, but it still doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. And we have
Well,
to.
you know, it was an imperfect question, so you got an imperfect answer. What can you do?
Let's release a book like that. We'll show Brahmatirtha Prabhu.
Okay, so to follow up on that, we're talking about creating these good relationships. So if one is thinking about entering a relationship, what should they be looking for? Or what should they be looking at?
The first thing you should look at is yourself. You know, do I really know why I want to get married? Am I getting married for the right reasons? You know, am I ready to give up being single? You know, am I ready for the we, or I just still want the I with somebody serving me, you know? And I want to see that I'm mature enough to know what I want and I don't want in a partner. You know, that takes some introspection. And I also need to understand that, you know, it's not my partner's job just to fulfill me and rescue me and make me happy. And what we see over and over and over again is, do I have the ability to be able to discipline my self-serving impulses and put another person first? You know, do I have sufficient emotional regulation? Do I not easily get into arguments? You know, can I understand things from another person's point of view? How judgmental am I? You know, can I be serious in fulfilling commitments? So we really do have to, you know, look at ourselves. And I think we also need to see that the other person has gone through that stage themselves too. So then, you know, it's like, what do you need to look for in a partner? And really it boils down to three main things. Do you have similar values? You know, like for most of us who are practitioners of Krishna consciousness, we want somebody who has a similar value, that they want to devote themselves to spiritual activities. So you want to look for someone with similar values. And you want to see that they have the same lifestyle that you're looking for. You know, like world travelers maybe aren't so well paired up with people who like to stay indoors all day in their house, you know. And you want to see if your personalities, you know, jive together, you know, because you're going to spend a lot of time with that person. So you want to see if you have, you know, compatible natures and compatible personalities. And one of the things that makes it difficult is we can tend to be impulsive and just go by the heart, you know, like we think Disney's given us the great idea, just go where your heart goes. So yeah, you want to go where your heart goes, but you also need to do it with some introspection, some thought. So you need to use your heart and some intelligence and take enough time that you can put the two together. So Ekanta Bhakti, how did you ever figure out you wanted I don't know, for a husband?
It's the eyes. Well,
Do I have to answer that now with him?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we think we've done all the work, and then we get married and we realize that we haven't done as much work as we thought we did.
I told her that. You need to do more work. I just told her point blank. But actually, this leads me to one last thought into this series of questions. You know, like, I mean, it turned out that she was the one for me. She was the right one, you know. But I tell you, there were a few years there in the beginning of our marriage where I was still introducing her as my first wife, just to keep her on her toes, So not really. My question is, how do you know that she or he is the right one? How do you know?
How did you know?
How did I know? I didn't know immediately. I immediately suspected, but then it took me a while to know. Not a long while, but a lot of it was what you were saying, Utma, like just things were lining up, compatibility, reference base.
We laugh at the same things.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
All
so
connected.
it does take a little time,
Hmm.
And, I know there's, two sort of schools of thought. One, I let my parents arrange it for me and I don't have to do any of the thinking. But I think that even in those circumstances, we should let our parents know, what we're looking for, and to ask some right questions, before we seal the deal. Maybe they're over the internet or whatever, but I think we should take some responsibility to see that the other person is going to have similar values. Our personalities, are compatible, and we have the same lifestyle goals. So even if you are entering into, an arranged marriage, like, many of our Indian friends do, that's necessary. And especially if you're choosing for yourself and you don't have the, wise guidance of elders that, maybe have some experience, I do think we need to take a little time and make sure that, we have looked into all those things.
Great. Thank you both very, very much. Appreciate it. Big thank you to all the panel. That wraps up right now the questions that we wanted to ask you. We'd like to turn it over to the audience right now. Just to remind you, our audience, that you can type questions directly into the chat box if you're on Zoom, directly to Akanta Bhakti and myself, and or you could use the link that Ladini has put in the chat box, which will take you to a Google questionnaire. That questionnaire is anonymous, so if you want to ask a question anonymously, we'll get that question, but we won't know who you are. So you can do that. And for our Prabhus and Matajis watching on Facebook, you can ask your questions through that questionnaire. You'll have to use that questionnaire, okay? So you want to do the first one?
Okay, so this first question actually goes back to Ekavira and Rajalila Prabhus, what they were talking about. You're talking about spiritual technologies and how to connect with each other with these spiritual technologies. You were talking about the 6 loving exchanges and revealing your minds in confidence. And the question comes out from Soumya Prabhu. What happens when we reveal something confidential, which could be our frustrations with each other, and the other person shares the conversation with public, like releases that confidence to other people? What do we do in such situations? How do we respond?
Yeah, thank you for your question. The statement is revealing your mind in confidence. And the confidence is the understanding, mutual understanding that this will be held privately. And trust is a very, very important component in relationships. And so when that trust is developed, then we can go deeper, we can appreciate each other, we can draw on inspiration, we can encourage each other. However, when the trust is broken, the direct opposite happens. We become less enthused, we become, we can lash out. And so it's very important to maintain this trust in our relationship, especially in this particular exchange, revealing our minds in confidence. When this happens, it's extremely painful. And it's important to actually express the pain that that has been caused basically by sharing this publicly, this information publicly. Because mainly what we're talking about is establishing a connection from the heart. And so by, again, it's difficult becoming vulnerable and expressing how this has caused us pain. It still makes a heart connection. And so we can actually, how could I say, we can endear trust when we become more trustworthy. We can be the example of this trust by, of course, not revealing the information, and then also becoming more vulnerable in the relationship by sharing our feelings and how we're hurt by that particular action. Anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Somnia. I'm sure that many people, face this dilemma of sharing their hearts, and then someone may share to somebody else, or they may share to many other people. So I think, for me, some of my thoughts are to understand yourself first. What are you feeling about what that person did? And to understand I'm guessing needs are important. Your need for trust would be very important in this situation. And so when trust is broken, then also we need to explore a little bit what is it that the other person may have going on for them, why that they may not have that same value that you have, or that same need. Given that you have this need for trust and it's very strong, perhaps for them, they may not see that they're breaking trust. They may see what they're doing through a whole different paradigm, because maybe they're trying to get some support or some acknowledgement or some understanding from the person that they're revealing whatever you shared to. And so empathy is really important. Being an empathetic person, I have found in my own life, has helped me, so much navigate through so many different situations where I might feel some hurt or some pain. And then I walk in that other person's shoe to try to understand, why do they do what they do? And when I get a little glimpse of what might be going on for them, what is their intention, I will often learn that their need also, they had some needs also for, like I said, acknowledgement or something that they needed, why they may have shared. I'm not saying I support someone not being confidential. I'm just sharing walk in that other person's shoe to understand why that's not a precious, tender value for them. Because we're individuals.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. Really nicely addressed there. Here's a question that I'd like to throw to Chintamani and Jagannath Prabhus. Question is kind of an interesting thing here. What do you do when your partner is too selfless? They do too much for the children. They do more than maybe they should. They become overburdened and stressed because of it. And then you find yourself doing things beyond your own safe or healthy boundaries. And you're doing this for your partner, but then, so that they're not stressed, but then I become stressed. What to do in a situation like that? Any ideas, you guys?
Very good question. One thing is that we, in a family, there's always a teamship that develops or should develop because everyone is doing their part in the team. It's like within any type of organization or grouping or business or something like that. There's so many duties that have to be performed. At the same time, we all have personal needs, okay? Spiritual needs, emotional needs, mental health needs, physical needs. All these things are there. One of the things that we do in our family is we have regular family meetings. Usually we try to have them every week, but that doesn't always happen. But what it does is it allows us to share how things are going, you know, the systems that we've set up, you know, and how we work together. How can we improve, or if anyone needs more support than another, you know, how we can balance off each other in that way. And sometimes there's times where one of us has more of a burden on us, and we can support that person, you know, and so on. So communication is a key part of it, and also self-awareness and understanding that that you are part of a team. And when you have that open communication, then you can see where the needs are, and maybe for this week I can take on a little bit more than I usually take on because someone else really needs that support. So the key aspect is ongoing, open, honest communication in the teamship.
Yes, and the point that Jagannath Pandit mentioned about self-awareness, I feel is critical. One thing that Mother Archana and Karnamrita Prabhu emphasize a lot is understanding what our motivations are for the things that we do. And as you know, Karnamrita Prabhu dedicated his life, and particularly in the last years, to chronicling his process of unfoldment. And one of the things that he boldly talked about in a very raw and detailed way is things that informed his behavior, his upbringing, and his parents' relationship, and his conditioning, and areas of strength, and, you know, different tools that he utilized in the Bhakti process. And a tool that Archana and Karnam also educated, I know, me on, something I didn't know much about, is the Enneagram. And that's a body of education that helps us to understand what our motivations are and how that's reflected in our personalities and our interactions with others. So I'm a Enneagram 2, and Enneagram 2 are the helpers. And, you know, something Karnam emphasizes, when you're understanding your conditioning, it helps you with working on your anarthas because you're understanding how your body's conditioned. So the 2, who's the helper, is kind of like the type that this person who asked the question is probably talking about. The person who gets a lot of satisfaction from helping and serving and, you know, thinking of other people and overdoing and over-worrying about the children and thinking about the neighbors. And those are really good qualities to have, particularly as a spiritualist, because you do want to be someone who's focused on serving others. But what I hear in the question is something that I have to caution myself about on a lot of different levels. Number one, overly being like that can help you really not be attuned to your self-care and your own needs, which then can put a burden on other people. And it also, because we dive deeper in Krishna consciousness, it can also have like a lot of like false ego stuff with it. So it like looks really good because you are helping others, and it is good when you help others. But sometimes what happens, particularly with twos, is you get really attached to people reciprocating that and people noticing it. If they don't notice, you kind of like think you're a bad person. You know, there's like so much that can be there that as one looks carefully at those motivations, you can see how to give in a way that serves everyone, serves yourself, serves your family, and serves others. So I think the point that Jagannath Pandit was saying about communication is really important. And again, how can we each use the many tools that we have been made aware of and that we can learn more about to do self-exploration to see how we can let go of things. So we're not just in automatic patterns. Based on our conditioning from lifetimes, we have a lot of automatic patterns. So the more we can look at any of our automatic patterns and try to address it, the more we can make progress. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. I think that was terrific. Here is a question. This is directed toward Mother Uttama. Prabhu, you mentioned.
Am I entering?
All right, you mentioned, am I entering a marriage for the right reasons? And you said that the first thing that we should ask, no, I'm sorry, the first thing we should do is look at ourselves. Right? Am I here?
Yeah.
What are the right reasons, right? For marriage. What within ourselves should we look at or work on? So is that referring to emotional baggage that we might have and should work through? Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yes.
I thought you would.
Chintamani was mentioning how, checking our motivations is crucial. So here also it's seeing that, understanding our own motivations. Because if we're just looking for someone who's going to fix all of our problems for us, do everything for us, make us happy, that's probably unrealistic. And if we haven't done our work to clear up our emotional baggage, we're probably looking through some very dirty lenses at who we are going to choose. And so we may choose people with the same color lenses that we have, and maybe that's not in our best interest. So I think there's no getting around doing our own work first, because otherwise we're going to make poor choices.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, and we have a question that's going out to Ekavira Rajlila Prabhus. And the question is, Hare Krishna, may I ask, what if my partner has no interest in my spiritual journey to ISKCON? What can you advise me?
Okay. Thank you for that question. Thank you so much. That's such a relevant question for modern families, because sometimes we tend to want to marry into an institution, and marrying into an institution, yes, it does mean having to understand, what are the rules and regulations and guidelines in the institution, and also having some responsibility. Yeah, having our responsibilities for them. So the institution, what is the purpose of the institution? So the purpose is to let us remember that we're loving and caring beings. That's the foremost prerequisite of why Srila Prabhupada established this institution, so that we can remember that we are connected, to the Lord, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And how do we do that? How do we get that connection? We get to remember Krishna by associating with those persons that do remember Krishna. So if you're in a relationship where someone is not inimical to learning about Krishna, then that relationship, is worth working with. If the person is also maybe a little inimical to ISKCON, the institution, my thoughts on that is that doesn't make the person a bad person, or it doesn't make the person not a marriageable person. However, it does require communication with that person to know that that the institution is a part of what is going to help you spiritually unfold, if that's what you think. Not everyone thinks that. However, if that's your belief system, that the institution is important for your spiritual unfoldment, then you and your partner does need to have communication about that. And sometimes that takes time, because in the beginning of relationships, just to think about being with that person is to kind of merge together in an institution. Marriage is like an institution. And so to add another institution into that can be a little difficult sometimes for some people. So the important thing I would say is really, as Uttama Prabhu shared, and everyone on the panel is sharing, really get present to the person's qualities, their values, their intentions, their motivations. Be present to that and see if those align with your values and your desires to unfold spiritually. Institution is an institution. At the same time, it is Srila Prabhupada, and we can be our best by allowing ourselves to learn and grow through Srila Prabhupada's mission. So you need to share that and talk about it, and spend time talking about it in a loving and caring way. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I could add just a little. There are members of the institution that unfortunately don't want to be a part of the institution. So institutions, they really don't save anyone. They provide the actual facility to have sadhu sangha, people of like-minded, like-minded, and to have the common goals, and that's to develop love for Krishna. And so how do we feel about persons who may be a part of different institutions? Well, we look at our example of the founder of the Grihastha Vision Team, Krishnandini and Tariq Prabhu. And we see, and through their example, and how what works in the marriage is what Rajalila was expressing, and all of the different members on the GBT panel. What's important is our values and what is the goal? What is the goal of this person? What is it that they desire, the utmost desire in their life? And if it's love for the Lord, then, the institution is secondary. And so in our relationship with Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he had disciples of many different traditions. And they were quite exalted personalities, but they weren't card-carrying Hare Krishnas. They were part of different religious systems. And so at some point, we are encouraged to go deep in our own process and become actual devotees and seek the essence and see the essence in other personalities. And so, sometimes we focus on the externals. And again, like I said, that we have members of our institution that don't really want to be members of the institution. So anyway.
Yeah, one last point. You deserve a loving, caring, friendly, supportive, nourishing relationship. Go for that.
How sweet. That's great. Thank you both. Yeah, that was terrific. You know, a question came in, excuse me, that sort of piggybacks on that a little bit. I'm going to go to Partha Prabhu to get your take on this.
Yes.
It's a little similar, but someone writes that if my spouse, my spouse, is gradually choosing to not be a part of the Krishna consciousness journey, but this person is still holding strong to it, but the spouse is sort of fading away. This can be very disheartening and difficult to navigate in terms of child rearing, life priorities, and so many other things. How can I accept where my spouse is in his spiritual journey without having resentment?
You want to be very careful about resentment, because resentment is like acid. It can completely destroy relationships. So this individual saying that their spouse's spiritual enthusiasm is diminishing. Well, the positive side of that is there's something there and it's diminishing. It's not that there's nothing there. So everyone may go through their ebbs and flows in their Krishna consciousness. And even in the Bhagavatam, it's described that even if someone gives up the spiritual path, they don't exactly undergo material existence. Even if someone completely leaves the spiritual path, the Bhagavatam describes that Krishna is always there making arrangements for them to come back. So I think that's a very important point, is not to develop resentment, but to, as Vrajalila was saying, to be empathic and try to understand what your spouse's challenges are, what's maybe inside of them that's stifling their enthusiasm, what they can do to help them, what they can do to support them. And it's very important not to be judgmental, because if we're judgmental to someone who's at a point like that in their life, it's probably going to be very counterproductive. Whereas if we can extend some empathy and compassion and loving support for wherever they're at, that may help them to remain at least stable in the state of Krishna consciousness they're at, or help them to start to uplift. So at all costs, you want to avoid resentment and try to be empathic, try to be compassionate, and as Vrajalila was saying, be present and communicate in a loving way.
So one of the antidotes for resentment is appreciation. So she was asking, how do I not resent it? That's by trying to see what you can appreciate in your partner. And it's actually crucial to the development of your children, because children naturally go through times in their life when they're questioning the process of their upbringing. And do I want to accept it? And, you know, what of it am I going to accept? And maybe I don't want to do anything right now. I just like all the material stuff better. Is my mom going to reject me? You know, they want that security too. So we do need to be exemplary in how we deal with our partner, and appreciate how just by them being there, that offers a lot of support for your engagement in Krishna consciousness, and to appreciate that. And as everyone was saying, it's just a little blip in time. We have no idea, you know, how it's going to play out later, and, you know, whether the person will come back or maybe not for another lifetime. But we have to take responsibility for our behavior And we need to treat everyone with, love and compassion and not be judgmental. And that's actually the application of Krishna consciousness.
Thank you both. Thank you both. Just the depth of understanding, the love that we've been hearing all night long from all of our panelists is just overwhelming. The wisdom, the practical experience, the enthusiasm to share it. It's just really heartwarming. Thank you all.
And inspiring.
And inspiring, yeah.
Thank you.
We have to stop taking questions at this point, I think, because we have about 10 minutes left. I want to ask if any of the panelists have any brief closing, final thoughts, closing statements, anything you want to add, something that came to mind perhaps that you didn't get in, or just any parting words that you want to share. Maybe not, but if you do, please do so now.
May I add something to the last question?
Absolutely.
It reminded me when my husband and I first got married. So my husband has amazing parents. They've been married 55 years. And they're a wonderful example of just dedicated, loving couple. His father's a pastor and she's the pastor's wife. And his father's father and mother's father were co-pastors of the same church. And so when we first got married, I was telling my mother-in-law how I really appreciated how she was so such a support to her husband. And I think Jagannath said she's never even seen them argue. So I asked his mom, I said, how do how does a wife keep that mood of just being supportive of her husband when she may have a different view than him and she may want to force her view forward, because I was raised kind of like an independent woman, and nobody tells me what to do, like that type of thing. So his mother was so sweet. His mother said, you have to pray for your husband. You have to pray to the Lord that he'll guide your husband and guide his decisions and give him wisdom and help him to know how to take care of your family. And that was so beautiful. And we all know how Mother Krishnandini was a prayer warrior. So one of the things I'm trying to learn, being an Enneagram 2, intending to be a warrior, I tend to look at how people are struggling and worry about it. And so recently the Lord gave me a push to try to think about my children or people I'm concerned about in their highest spiritual expression. And when I'm praying and when I'm thinking about them, hold that vision. So instead of having the worrying, please help them, they're struggling, they're having such a hard time. So for this last question, to think about your spouse and pray for your spouse and think about your spouse in their highest expression of love of God, their highest desire for their service to God, and hold that thought as you're talking to them. Hold that thought as you're thinking to them, as you're thinking about them. As you pray for them, ask Krishna to help them to stand in that highest expression. So again, I think prayer can really, it does make a real difference. So we can pray for our spouses and see our spouses in their true nature as servants of Krishna versus their conditioned nature, and also ask our spouses to also pray for us and to pray for ourselves. So that power of prayer is just, really important.
Thanks for praying for me.
Thank your mom for, and my mom and my dad.
Yeah. That's powerful. Thank you for adding that.
Extended families, that's a separate panel discussion.
The in-law panel. We'll get to that at some point. Okay, so let's just move on. There's just a few things that we want to cover here before we sign off. For our audience, to find out more about Grihastha Vision Team events, please put your email or contact info in the chat box right here on Zoom. If you're on Facebook, you can just put it in the questionnaire. That same link, you can use that, okay? Ladini will put, if she hasn't already, put the website down and the Facebook page and the YouTube channel for the GVT. There's a website, there's a Facebook page and a YouTube channel, so she can do that. Yeah, I also want to mention if anyone is moved or inspired to make donations to the Grihastha Vision Team to support the wonderful, necessary work that they do, donations are accepted through the website. So you can go to that website link again. Also, we mentioned this before. It was mentioned before. I'd like to bring your attention to it. Let's see if I have this in frame. Yeah, the heart and soul connection. I don't know if you've seen this backwards, but that's all I can do. A devotional guide to marriage, service, and love. A devotional guide to marriage, service, and love. It's a heart and soul connection. The GVT members collaborated on this book. They each take different chapters. It's a wonderful book.
It's truly a labor of love.
It's truly a labor of love. So if anybody wants to get that, you can get it again through the GVT website. You can also get it at krishna.com. It's also available on Amazon. So check that out. At this point, we'd like to get to the poem. Yes, okay. So as I mentioned, it's a brief poem. It's sort of the trademark of the Grihastha Vision Team. It's called Better Together. And the treat that we have for you tonight is we're going to, normally somebody would recite the poem. We'd all recite together. And we do want people to recite together. We actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have a video of Mother Krishna Nandini and Tariq Prabhu of them reciting the poem, which will be very moving for us all to hear. But we don't want to just hear. We want to chant and hear. So while they're reciting it, although we do want you to stay muted because it gets cacophonous with Zoom, everybody talking at once, stay muted, but please do, we're going to put the words up there, recite the poem with Krishna Nandini and Tariq Prabhu's. So Ladini, whenever you want to get that going, it's all you. Don't you put that on yet, Ladini, because also we want to thank her for designing such beautiful flyers. She's been doing the flyers that you see, the posters and all that. It's been beautiful. It's been great. Your contribution, Ladini, is invaluable. So we thank you very much for that. So do we think we have this ready to go? If so, let it roll.
We're in this together through good times and stormy weather. We're willing to do the work it takes, be a team, pray, make less mistakes. We want to get better together. With faith in Krishna that our marriage will be great, we're learning to better communicate, to speak what we want with respect, to listen to get the most effect. We want to get better together. Our goal is to be each other's best friend, to get skills so our relationship won't have to end, tools to manage our time, children, and money, to avoid the mess and go after the honey. We want to get better together. Trust, forgiveness, respect, yes. Lying, cheating, fighting, no. With consideration, cooperation, and devotion, we can flow. We want to get better together.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Mother Krishna Nandini, Tariq Prabhu's, we love you. Karnamrita Prabhu, Archana Siddhi Mataji, we love you. Thank you all for being here. Ladini is going to unmute everybody right now so you can offer your Hari Bols and gratitude and whatever you like, just to say Thank you and goodbye as we sign off. Thank you so much.